In this lesson, we will finalize our end particle settings. So what we'll do in this lesson is have a look at a few more properties we can adjust to get a better look out of our particles. And then in the next lesson, we'll spend that time shading our particles so that they resemble steam. I'd also like to point out that even though this will be, let's say, the last lesson that we tweak our particle behavior in, that does not mean that that's the end, right? You can always tweak those values to get the exact look you want. So feel free to do so on your end. Alright, fantastic. So we're just going to play through and have an idea of what our particles are currently doing. And then we'll start to tweak their lifespan so that we can have them dissipate at a certain point, because we don't want them to live forever, and that's what's happening now. Let's go ahead and grab our particle object, and we'll move back to our particle shape node. From there, let's drop down the lifespan section. And you can see, by default, our particles are set to live forever, but we don't want that. Let's go ahead and choose something like random range. That's much better, in my opinion, than constant in this case, because with the random range, that means that certain particles will die before others or live longer than others, and that will all be randomized. According to our lifespan value and the random range, we essentially average those two values, and we use values in between that average to have the particles, again, die at different points in time. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and increase both values by 3. So now take a look at what happens when we hit play. You'll notice that the particles will die in a more natural way. Fantastic. Now from here, what I'd like to do is adjust the emitter rate. That way they push out a little bit more than they are right now. I think they're dying a little bit too soon. So we have a few ways we can edit that, right? Of course, we can adjust our lifespan to have them live a little bit longer, or we can start to work with our emitter. If we were to go to our emitter 1 object underneath our geometry, we can then move up to our rate parameter. Let's go ahead and play around with this value. What would 300 do? So now when we start to play through this, starting back from the beginning, you can see that looks much more like steam, right? Much more natural. How exciting is that? Sweet. And then what you can do is start adjusting the speed along with the random channel that affects the speed. So what I'd like to do is come here and maybe randomize the speed by about 3 units or so. That way they all have a slightly different speed to create something that looks more lifelike. How cool. Fantastic stuff. Now one more thing we can modify before we end this lesson is our radius scale. So this is found on the particle. Remember, we went to the particle size parameter here to set a default size for all particles, but what we can do then is create a transition where the particle maybe starts out a bit smaller but then ends larger, so that again we get something that's more convincing. So we can go ahead and take this first point here on our graph and start to bring that down a bit, maybe to about 0.16, and then we can take this endpoint and bring that up. So take a look at what this creates. Now it's almost as if, again, particles are being emitted from this hole in the ground, and then they start to get a little bit larger as we get to the end of their life. Fantastic. And we could also start to adjust this even further, maybe dropping this endpoint just to get something that looks a little bit more polished. So feel free to do so until you manage to find something that works for you. So this looks pretty cool. I'd say this would be a good time to do a play blast just to make sure we like what we see. So we can head over to Window, Play Blast Options. We can then go ahead and reset the settings. What I'll do is go ahead and turn off Show Ornaments. That hides my axis handle, camera name, things like that. Instead of using AVI as our format, let's go ahead and work with image, and we'll switch our encoding type to Maya. This will give us a very fast playback and a fast render. Wonderful. Feel free to increase the size of your play blast to a full amount of 1 or 100%. And I won't save this out, but you can if you'd like. So everything looks good. What I'll do is go ahead and pause the video and run the play blast. When I come back, we'll have a look at our work. And here it is. Sweet. Alright, so as you can see, we're getting a much more natural look from our particles. They're really starting to look like steam. Fantastic. Now, what we need to do is learn how to shade them so that they can have the transparency that we would need to make this look more convincing. Because some of these are way too opaque, right? A lot of these are, so we need to make sure that we can get a much more natural look from our end particles. So let's say we go ahead and stop the lesson here. In the next lesson, we'll learn how to do just that.